Welcome to the Oncology Voice Network podcast, connecting the voices that move oncology drug development forward.
Welcome to the Oncology Voice Network podcast. I'm Dr. Kirk Shepard. This show brings the real-world voices of oncology drug development to life. Leaders, innovators, patients, and partners who are shaping the future of cancer care. Training is everywhere. Organizations invest millions into it. Teams go through it. Certificates get completed. Confidence goes up. And yet, when it actually matters, behavior often stays the same. Why is that? Today, we're joined by Gregg Terry, President and CEO of Educational Resource Systems, who spent his career working at the intersection of education, training, and real-world performance. He's had a front-row seat to what happens after the training ends, when teams are expected to execute. In this conversation, we unpack the gap between learning and doing, why training so often fails to change behavior, where organizations misread success, and what it actually takes to drive meaningful, measurable impact at scale. Gregg, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kirk. I'm happy to be here. Great to see you again.
To begin, we would love to understand your background and how you came into this space. What led you into working at the intersection of education, training, and real-world performance?
It's kind of interesting, Kirk. I didn't really have any intention, to be perfectly frank, of entering into the life sciences pharmaceutical arena. But I had the good fortune of having an internship program as part of my education at Seton Hall in communications and marketing. And I've actually learned how to edit on an editing system. This is back in 1982, by the way. Not to date myself, but I certainly will. That Johnson & Johnson, believe it or not, had just recently purchased. I had attended a meeting that was at the Prudential location in Newark, New Jersey for the International Television Association. It was a group that I was encouraged to join through college, through my communications department at Seton Hall. And like I say, I had this internship that I was able to learn this system that, ironically, J&J had just purchased. I handed out resumes because, again, predating internet, there's no cell phones. Getting the opportunity to get in front of someone to make a first impression was not the easiest back in the day. But fortunately for me, I was able to do that. And someone shared my resume with someone at Johnson & Johnson, ironically, and asked if, in fact, I knew this particular editing system. So, my background's really in video production, photography, and editing. So that was really my entry into the life sciences arena with Johnson & Johnson, actually with Ortho Diagnostic Systems, eventually Ortho McNeil Pharmaceutical, and then ultimately Janssen.
Was there a moment in your career that changed how you think about the gap between what people learn and how they actually behave?
Oh, absolutely. So as part of my role earlier in my career with J&J, I was involved with doing role plays and doing various types of activities as part of a workshop or part of an onboarding, a training. It could be initial training classes, things of that nature. And what I really noticed was that, it really didn't matter so much on someone's background per se or tenure, but there was always a intrinsic sort of the way people looked at the business opportunity or the training itself and the translation of the training into actions. And what I was finding was that, largely based on someone's confidence in what they were able to communicate, really drove how effective they were in the role play situation or the actual live environment. From that point and that role and that responsibility that I had, I then went out at one point and carried the bag. So I actually became a sales rep for one of the Johnson & Johnson companies. Did that role for about 18 months or so. And so I took my background in video production and role play and working in the training department. I kind of did like an inside out. Most people carry the bag first and they come inside to home office. Well, I was inside a home office and I was able to integrate or interface, I should say, with a variety of marketing and sales individuals within the company. And then ultimately went out and carried the bag and got a firsthand experience of what it really was like, to meet with the healthcare providers, to try to speak to them about different products and different patients and things. And I learned firsthand what I had just experienced, ironically, when I was working with different talents in role play scenarios and the video production aspect of that, and helping the individuals to really better learn at their role or better learn in their role how to apply what their knowledge acquisition then translated into actionable items in front of a healthcare provider. So here I was now in that role. And it was quite interesting and quite eye opening, to be perfectly honest.
Well, those are wonderful experiences that form the foundation for what you're doing now. You work closely with teams across companies, often during critical moments like launch and execution. What does that vantage point allow you to see about how education and training actually plays out in practice?
You're absolutely right. Our company has launched well over 150 different products for a variety of different clients, over 36 different clients in a variety of therapeutic areas. And what it really has allowed me to see is basically the different types of education and training, the retention that people have, and be able to put that knowledge acquisition into performance, into an actual environment, selling environment with a variety of different, obviously, healthcare providers. The one thing I will say that, stands out, and this was a kind of a game changer for me, we were working with a client company and it was a co-promote. We had a highly educated talent on both sides of the fence, if you will. One company that was highly specialized in oncology. The other one was sort of a generalist, if you will, that would be selling a product in the oncology space. Very different styles, very different training, very different delivery. Part of what we did in that launch meeting was we provided a certification with live physicians, actual prescribers of what would be intended to be product itself. And the evaluations came back that the company that had the sort of, if you will, oncology experience was very much focused on the science. They were very much focused on the product, the mechanism of action, the way that the product was working, you sort of focusing on patient, but really very much on the high science side of that discussion. The other group was very much about the patient journey, about the experience, about the patient treatment team. And so the very different focus, but highly effective in both regards. So, my takeaway there was it's not a one size fits all. You have to adapt to all of the training, all of the opportunities that you have before you. The training is not a one size fits all. And oftentimes client companies will look at it that way. We call it check the box training when they do that. But again, it's not probably the best application of training in a real world experience.
And across oncology and other complex areas, do you see any unique challenges in how teams translate learning into action?
Oh, absolutely. It's such a complex area, and it's only become more complex over the last 30 years, as you know. The prescribing, the decision making, the ability to position a product effectively, market access, pull through, frankly, access to healthcare providers, just generally speaking. And then what does that team look like? So, the sales representative, if you will, the pharma sales representative of the 80s to 90s is far different than here we are in 2026. And it's really become more of a kind of a team approach, right? Medical affairs, you've got your medical science liaisons, you've got your sales representatives. If they're all on the same page, if they're all communicating a similar message, again, not so much on a sales side for a medical science liaison, obviously they're at a much higher science positioning the product and talking about its, effectiveness and patient profile, et cetera. The sales rep really is more of a pull through in that regard, and looking at those types of platforms and those types of individuals who are pulling that through, if you will, it's consistency in the message, right? Where we see issues oftentimes is if there's a disconnect between, medical science liaison, market access, and then obviously the role of the representative in the day to day. We try to manage all of that. And I think the client companies that are receptive to that and get everyone at the table at the same time. That's really important. We don't want to fragment what the message is. Obviously, that message needs to be communicated in a succinct manner and a consistent manner.
Are there patterns consistently showing up when it comes to teams being trained but not changing behavior?
Oh, yeah. 100%. So, but oftentimes, people are creatures of habit, right? So you go through the training because guess what? You have to go through the training and you check the box and you get your, score, and your score is more than satisfactory. Now you've got to put that into application. Well, that's kind of where the rubber meets the road, right? Because if you don't really apply what you've just learned into a practical application, into a real world setting, you're not going to be successful. So what people often do is they say, "Yeah, I know how to do that," or they get a little passive about it. They become more, I don't know, less about the change of behavior or behavior change, I should say, and more about, I learned it, I'm going to go still do it my way, which oftentimes isn't effective. So, again, when we provide the level of training, background, anatomy, physiology, modules, disease state, product, et cetera, and then translate that into a workshop environment, our workshops will be pull through oriented, right? So they're going to be very much focused on, hey, you learned all that core background knowledge, but now we're going to apply it into a real world setting that's going to have a successful outcome. And, again, in various levels, people are able to absorb that and able to put that into action. And again, I think part of that too comes with strong leadership. I've seen in client companies where we did the training, we, put our people back out into the field, and guess what? We didn't realize that, the product was going to be affected by, let's say, step therapy, or the ability to really understand how that product was going to be positioned after multiple fails on other products. So it wasn't really a first line product, although it was superior. We thought for sure the adoption would be much higher. Well, guess what? It wasn't, because that level of communication was missed somewhere along the lines. So again, we try to evaluate and we try to be more of a strategic partner to our clients. Look at the entirety of the opportunity, not just about what the training need specifically is at the moment.
Well, let's talk more about a core problem, why behavior doesn't change. Organizations invest heavily in education and training. So, why do so many teams go through training and still not change how they operate?
Someone that's out in the field currently calling on a set of physicians that they've known for years, perhaps, or, let's say in the last couple of years, whatever the case may be, they're comfortable, right? So if the physician is driving that sales call or whatever the activity that takes place within the context of that call, they're going to be probably defaulting to whatever direction the healthcare provider is taking in that discussion. I'm not going to say that that happens all the time, but very often, and I'll never forget one scenario that I had many, many years ago. He used to tell you, use the visual aid, make sure you follow the visual aid. I had one physician, and I'll never forget it because I saw a picture of him recently that a good friend of mine, we're still good friends, shared. They were out to dinner together, and it was Dr. Marino, and Dr. Marino literally took the visual aid out of my hands, put it down on the desk, and said, "Okay, now talk to me." And that was an eye-opening moment for me. Now I know that was a long time ago. So, but how does that translate into today's world? I wasn't listening. I was on a mission. I had a mindset that I have to get through the 4, 8 pages, whatever it was, in order to be effective. Guess what? Dr. Marino didn't want it that way. Dr. Marino wanted it his way. So, subsequently, when I would walk in, I never took out a sales aid. We talk about everything. And then eventually we get to product. And I would talk about patient types. I talk about our products. I talk about how he's using our products. Highly effective. But again, you have to adjust to whatever your environment is. And that was a big adjustment for me, to be honest. And that was a real eye opener. And that still happens today. So, again, the engagement's often driven by, potentially what the interest of the healthcare provider is versus what your general interests are or your assignment is going into that office.
And maybe some advice for some companies, even when the training is completed successfully, are there early signs that the behavior is not going to change with the teams in the company?
In some cases, people overthink, right? They overthink how they're going to incorporate that training into their space versus really just, working with it and understanding it. Oftentimes, you're talking about a mindset shift. And, training in and of itself is really an acquisition of knowledge, but how do you put it into your own words and how do you apply it in an office setting or a hospital environment or, in a pharmacy, whatever the case may be? That's really what it comes down to. So again, because the training was effective and everyone scored high, again, it goes back to application and, it comes back to touch points. It comes back to making sure that what you thought was adequate insofar as the background and training is being put into a real world, purposeful environment and executing on whatever the message is successfully.
There's often an assumption that more training leads to better execution. Do you think that most training programs are designed to check a box rather than change behavior?
Unfortunately, that is often very true. We've encountered situations in the past where I need this workshop, I need this module. And then you get under the hood a little bit and you're like, that's not exactly where the problem lies. Problem lies in the communication earlier on, let's say, or maybe there's an issue, with reimbursement that is not being addressed. Maybe it's an access issue. So again, not all training is one size fits all. I said that earlier, but again, that holds true. In different environments, obviously, mandate different outcomes, different presentations, and different discussions. I think flexibility, adaptability, those are critical when you're designing your training. And then there's regional differences naturally. There's always something that's going to, be driven or driving the success of any one experience or product in a different environment. So again, being adaptable to that, providing the proper leadership and direction and support for the representative in the field.
So, are there general or even specific factors that differentiate training that informs versus training that truly changes behavior?
It's interesting. We did a program a while ago, to answer, to sort of put in context, where we took the product discussion out of the equation. We talked about presentation skills. We talked about things like, how do you present? Do you make eye contact? Basic skill sets. And then we reintroduced the product discussion. We actually used a professor of improv from NYU. This is some time ago, but it was very, very effective. And we did a recording and we asked people to present on different things. It had nothing to do with pharmaceutical, life sciences, product specific, but it was about other things in general. And what they noticed, there's, the use of your hands, the use of your eye contact, you're jingling your hands with change in your pocket, like things of that nature. And people really kind of were made aware of what they do and how that affects their presentation or their discussion. It really was very eye opening. It really was something that I think at the end of the day, and we put managers through this program, managers, reps, everyone went through the program. Highly effective. The outcome was one that I think was very impactful. And again, it didn't have anything to do with product specific. So sometimes it's just about how you present, right? It's how your voice inflection is. It's how enthusiastic you are about what it is that you're talking about, how knowledgeable you are. The ability sometimes also to not back yourself into a corner, be able to go to your left or right to say, you know what, I don't know the answer to that right now, or let me get someone else, or let me, come back to you. That's okay. Because what you don't want to do is ever give the wrong answer and give someone the impression or take them down a path that obviously is going to lead to failure.
I'm glad you mentioned outcomes because even when the behavior starts to change, translating that into meaningful outcomes is not always straightforward. So, what is the connection between behavioral change and real world impact that organizations often miss?
Really, how do you measure success? I mean, behavioral change is certainly it's something that takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. It's the consistency of a message. It's consistency of the thought, the process, the presentation. You're steering a ship, if you will, and a mindset that's not going to just change automatically. It's not going to change overnight. You need to be consistent. You need to be adaptable. You need to be able to look at the opportunity and really analyze it in a way that's probably a little bit different because the training unto itself gave you the background, it gave you the knowledge, but behavioral change and then the outcome associated with that, obviously, in the past, it's been, hey, I saw an increase in prescriptions for my product. Okay, that's a measurement of success. But at the end of the day, did you really shift a mindset on the part of the healthcare provider? Did you shift a mindset in the pharmacy? Where did you shift the mindset because of your consistency in your message? I think oftentimes a lot of our, well, not a lot, but at least a fair number of representatives kind of give up if they don't see the change. That's the other thing. You can't see change overnight necessarily. It's a consistency in the message and in the conversation that you're having with your healthcare provider.
So, let's talk about alignment, readiness, and execute reality. Teams often feel aligned and prepared after training and planning efforts. So, why do teams feel ready after training but struggle in the real world execution?
It's part of that knowledge acquisition and having a confidence. I know that I have that background now. I went through all the training and I checked the box and I did scored a high score, but now I have to really put it into application. That's where the wheels oftentimes will come off. The communication, the value, the ability to be present, the ability to adapt in a situation, answer and respond to questions, confidence. Again, it's just not a matter of going through the training and checking a box and getting your high score. It's really about what did I do in a simulation that now is transferable into the real world environment. We do a lot of work with simulations. AI now has come on the scene in such a large way with various AI coaching platforms. And the coaching platforms are only as good as the ability for someone to interact and then apply that into an actual sales call environment. It's tempered. We're in an environment too that's highly controlled, it's highly restricted. So even those types of exercises, while they're important and while they help, help someone to verbalize and to be ready for the real world environment, it's not always that way. There's stressors that are involved. Obviously, there's time restraints, there's access. I mean, since, I've started this business 33 years ago, and, you see the amount of time that a representative has, or a medical science liaison, or anyone for that matter, who has access, even now that they may or may not, it's limited. And there's a lot of challenges and there's a lot of moving parts. Medicine has become highly specialized, and if you can't speak to maybe one of these little areas, big areas, that is a value to your healthcare provider, if you miss the mark, that's your opportunity. You may never get it back again. So again, it's not just understanding that I have this core background knowledge. It's how do I take that? How do I apply it? And how do I adapt based on whatever direction, the conversation goes in? That's a challenge.
In the category of what does good look like, some teams consistently translate learning into behavior and impact better than others. What do these high performing teams do differently when it comes to applying what they've learned?
So as a team, they need to be consistent in their message. As a team, they need to have at least a confidence in each other at various levels, right, of execution in the training and in the delivery process. We work with medical affairs teams. We work with obviously pharma reps. The role of the rep obviously has changed dramatically. It's more of a consultancy role now. Very high science. They're elevating obviously their knowledge base, but as a team, they need to be consistent. They can't be fragmented. Oftentimes you'll hear, medical affairs will be the leader pre-commercial, and they'll be out, talking about the unmet need and all of the various aspects of that. Now the product gets close to launch. Now it's launched. Now it's up the opportunity for the representative to pull it through. Well, medical affairs doesn't go away, right? Medical affairs still needs to support the research, the science, the unmet need. The rep is going to just pull that through. It might include market access now. It might include other areas, obviously, that are incredibly valued to the success of that product and the outcome for the patient. So again, being consistent. Your job's not done. Medical affairs has their role. The representative has their role. If there's a specialist in market access or access, generally speaking, they have their role, but they all need to be very consistent. I just recently read something where a number of companies are sending out 4 or 5 different individuals to call on the same healthcare teams. And they all have a slightly different message, right? Because they're coming at it from different levels, which makes sense. But at the end of the day, they need to talk to each other. They need to be consistent about what they're seeing in a hospital group or a hospital environment or an office environment, whatever the case may be. And they need to share that information. I think that's critically important. Not all companies do that.
Looking ahead now, there's increasing focus on improving how organizations learn, operate, and deliver results. What would need to change for education training to consistently translate into behavior and real impact?
It's a mindset shift. It's also the ability to obviously change behavior. It's the ability to incorporate the trainings into your day to day. I mentioned consistency. I know I've said it a bunch of times, but consistency, adaptability, these are all valuable considerations, obviously, that are going to drive the success of any of the training or any execution in the field. A big part of it too is, we've had situations in the past where a client would say to us, the need in the field is this. And they're making an assumption largely based on what maybe behaviors that they see, but it's not, it's more of an N of one or two as opposed to the entirety of the organization, or asking the managers or getting kind of that feedback. They're trying to build some training experiences or training designs that may or may not actually reach the field and be effective once they're there. So we often encourage them to, reach out and do a larger group population survey to find out, what's really happening and where do you see the issues? Where do you see the inherent lack of success, let's say, or time with physician or something to that effect. We've built workshops and podcasts and different types of webinars that address these types of things. But time is of the essence, and the value of getting, particularly around launch, the success of a launch meeting, really, or launch product, I should say, is really within the first 3-6 months post launch, and that's it. So you really want to be ready. You want to make sure that your market research aligns with what the actual intent is, the application, and the use of that product, the prescribing of that product, in addition to all the other things that we've been talking about.
Every team changed one habit tomorrow. What would most improve execution and outcomes?
Accountability. I think leadership needs to hold their people accountable. No more excuses. I truly believe that if the training is designed in a way that obviously helps the learner to execute, and they're not executing, and they've done all of the research, they've done all of the role plays and the simulations and all the things that they were supposed to do, prior to actually executing, and they're not, oftentimes it's complacency. It's, kind of falling back on, well, this is what I've done in the past. It's worked. Well, guess what? It's not going to work in the future. It's not going to work right now. So they have to be willing to change their own behavior, but then leadership needs to hold them accountable. We get involved with leadership programs, and oftentimes those leadership programs talk about change behavior, talks about accountability. But at the end of the day, who's really holding who accountable. And that's the thing. And that's one of the things that I think more companies need to hold their people accountable. Don't accept, 50%. It's 100%. You need to see that actually happen. And frankly, if the training's not working, change it. It's okay to go back and course correct. What you thought was going to work, hey, maybe it didn't work when it reached the end point. But don't keep driving the end point if it's not working. Make the change. It's okay. That's what we do.
Let's end with a personal question. What does it mean to you to help organizations move from learning to real world impact?
Well, Kirk, if you ask me what gets me out of bed in the morning, that's certainly one of the items that does get me out of the bed in the morning. And I love it. I love what we do. I love training. I love change behavior. I enjoy, just tech overall. I just love life science. I love what we do and how we do and how we're helping patients. Just recently we did an immersion program, and the immersion program is a little bit different. We performed this activity at the Moffitt Center, also at UPenn. And what we did was we brought together prescribers, the healthcare team, marketing, the medical affairs folks, and some sales representatives into this, one day kind of seminar workshop. It was a real eye opener. And those are the kinds of things for me that are different. Like, we thought about this out of the box. We did something that was a little bit different. And I'm not saying that exclusive to educational resource system. Our competitors do it as well. We like to think we do it better. But naturally, an immersion program is understanding the patient. It's understanding all of the treatment teams. It's understanding the value of what this product not only means to the patient, but how it works inside of an access and reimbursement environment. It touched on everything. And I walked out of there, frankly, going into it with a thought and understanding of the product and the patient type. I was blown away. And so, for me personally, I love learning. I love those kinds of experiences. And I love bringing that and challenging our own teams to be able to implement these types of programs in the field with their customers. And I think that's the one thing that our clients really enjoy about us, is that we bring the innovation, we bring different designs, and we think out of the box. And that's the driver for me. That's what keeps me super engaged on a day-to-day here in educational resource systems.
Well, Gregg, that's an inspiring way to end our conversation. And I want to thank you for joining me today for this important discussion.
Thank you, Kirk. I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you for your partnership.
That's it for this episode. I'm Dr. Kirk Shepard. Thanks for listening and for being a part of the conversation that's moving oncology forward.